go back to pre-Christian traditions because I wanted to present the idea of a eternal artifact, something that transmutes itself but stays the same through time. Hello and welcome back to a brand new episode on That Works. Here at That Works, occasionally we have a chance of introducing our own original art. Not historical, or not necessarily, but something that we cherish as artists, something we really find inspiration in, and that's the kind of work that we look forward to all year to present to the public. This time, it's a short sword called Transubstantiation. This sword is to be exhibited at AKI, or also known as Art Knife Invitational, one of the most prestigious art knife shows in the world, with an international group of collectors as well as artists. Some of the members have included Jim Kelso, Vasily Vorobyov, and Yoshinda Yoshihara. So the pressure of making a piece of original art to any artist is very high. However, the outcome is just as rewarding. To flesh out the overall design and the idea for this sword, I had some help from Peter Johnson in our correspondence. He suggested me to work more with abstract forms and textures rather than my usual style, which is entirely representational. In search for a perfect idea, I was reading a bunch of books like Slavoj Žižek, Koji Nishitani, Soren Kierkegaard, and I stumbled upon the concept of transubstantiation, a ubiquitous idea throughout religions of the world, ranging from main point in Catholicism, as well as Buddhism and other animistic religions. The idea of inanimate matter turning into living flesh, and the other way around. This notion is actually very close, but taken for granted to any blade maker or blacksmith. The iron that is found on Earth, none of it is made by our planet. All of it is meteoritic iron. And the iron in space comes from the death of a star. You see, most stars are basically balls of hydrogen that are trapped in their own gravitational field, and they're pushed together so hard that they, at the core, the hydrogen starts fusing into helium, so on and so on and so on, until the core starts generating iron. And it's at the moment when the star is giving birth to iron that it is condemned to death. It explodes, spreading chunks of iron and other elements all throughout the universe, and now we dig it up in our backyard, make blades out of it. Iron is in our blood, carrying the oxygen that we inhale. Iron is both death and life. To give the future blade the undulating shape, I use the top tool under the power hammer to set up the dimples, and only then do I pull out my wide shoulder. If you pull out your shoulder first and then try to forge in the shape, you will inevitably hit those tips of the shoulders and shrink them, and that's not what I want. So something so grand as a star had to die for me to have the material to make my art. And I'm going to try to imbue it with a notion of life, notion of movement, hints of flesh, hints of veins, all transmuted together into one object. For the guard and pommel of the sword, I choose to work with wrought iron. One of the reasons is when you process it correctly and etch it, it gives it that ancient artifact feel that is unrepeatable in any other material. Unlike other weapons, swords have a unique symbolic place in human history throughout cultures. Unlike spears, axes, machetes, knives, polearms, they're not connected to everyday utilitarian farm use. Even a flail is derivative of a peasant's flail, or the Cossack shashka is derived from a knife that is used to cut down grapevine. A sword, as a sword, has always had a specific social class and religious status. Swords, most of the time, at least in theory, were only allowed to be used by nobility or by special dispensation by nobility or the state. Swords had a religious significance. In the Bible, Christ is supposed to return not bearing peace, but a sword. In Japan, the entire nation, according to Shinto, started out with a drip of foam falling from the edge of a sword. In all cultures, the sword is a symbol of power. Most of the times, it's also a symbol of justice. But justice depends on the wielder of the sword. It does not depend on the sword itself. The guard for the sword is originally intended to be a circular shape with a broken off quillen that really accents the aged artifact almost from another planet look. And the natural texture of wrought iron really brings in a depth of experience when the person is holding it. In choosing the overall form of the sword, I wanted to avoid the classical medieval look and go back to pre-Christian traditions because I wanted to present the idea of a eternal artifact, something that transmutes itself but stays the same through time. My goal here is not to represent a specific thing, but to give a sense and sense of something ancient coming to life or something dead resurrecting itself. A sense of one type of matter transforming itself into another. Even though everybody loves watching me make swords out of steel, forged Damascus, my favorite material to work with really is silver. It is a beautiful, beautiful metal. It is technically a precious metal, but it's cheap enough that I can have a good quantity of it to make goblets, handles, everything. It is also connected in virtually all cultures to notions of purity. This is not a historical sword by any means because it is art, and all art has to deploy a degree of abstraction. If I were to just copy a historical piece, point for point, exactly right, it would not be my art, and I would not do a good job as an artist. I might do an excellent job as a craftsman, but that is not the assignment here. And since my job is abstraction, I have to combine all the ideas that I stated before into one piece, one concise piece that is understandable to other artists. To contrast the tormented steel and the engraving, I inlay angel feathers made out of silver into the blade as well as into the fittings. See, this contrast goes back a long, long, long time. Tiamat, the evil goddess who Marduk destroyed to fashion the entire world out of it, predates Judaism. And even in the Gnostic school, it is the creator of the world who was evil, and out of his demise will come purity and goodness. So, overlaying angel feathers made out of silver over the hints of twisted flesh really accents that notion. And when I'm playing around with abstract ideas, very embodied feelings of materials coming into their true form, I think it's a successful move as an artist, as well as makes the piece stand out. To inlay the angel feathers into the blade, I first cut out my silver template, which will turn into a feather eventually, and then I trace it with a scribe directly onto the blade. I use the tracing to start carving back where the feather will sit. One of the key points when you're trying to inlay silver into Damascus or any other material is that once you have your channel, which is flat at the bottom, you have to pry out the corners. That way they create a burr, and when the silver sits in, they close it on and create almost a dovetail effect. With projects like these, heat treating is the point of no return, and I mean really the point of no return. After the blade will come out of the oil, it will be harder than most of my tools, which I use to cut the blade for hours and hours. So the next stage, any corrections will have to be made by slowly hand sanding and polishing select areas and leaving other ones crusted from the flame of heat treating. I have been approaching this project through the eyes of a painter. The color of the gemstones, garnet, was chosen because it's the closest one to blood, unlike ruby, which is pink. And it is always the last 10% of the project that occupies 50% of your time, where you have to tread very carefully, since any mistake will make me start from point zero. To keep in line with the ancient artifact feel of the piece, I choose to use mammoth ivory for the handle. It comes from an animal that's been extinct since the Younger Dryas period. And it's actually fairly tricky to work with because it is not a fossil. And as you keep cutting it, you're exposing more and more depth. As a result, it evaporates more and more moisture. So a common problem with mammoth ivory is that over time, and even as you're working with it, it moves and cracks. And I have to watch out for that phenomenon as well. All the iron you see is the fingerprint of a funeral, and the craftsman's hands are the handmaidens of life. So, from something you can find on the floor to something that can be exhibited in a gallery, I present to you transubstantiation. If you like seeing my original art projects on this channel, please click like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments what you would prefer to see next. Remember, we work with your ideas and we always try to introduce our own.